Hi, what is an isocostline? Well, it looks like a line. Why don't we draw it? It looks like a line and is associated with the same cost. So here this line is associated with the same costs for input factors for a company. Input factor number 1, labor, capital L. Input factor number 2, V2, capital or capital K. These input factors lead to the same cost. So we need prices, as this is obvious. And so, for example, the price for the input factor V1 could be pi 1, and the price for the input factor V2 could be pi 2, and the expenditures for input 1 plus the expenditures for input 2 yield the cost. And all points here on the line, all points on the line, right? All points here on the line are associated with the same costs. That's the idea of the isocost line. Well, let's take now the example of costs for labor. What are the costs for labor? Well, that's the wage. W stands for the wage, the hourly wage, times labor. That's the amount, quantity of labor. So these are the costs of labor input, plus the costs of the capital input. What are the costs of capital input, like machines? Well, typically you pay an interest rate, small r, for capital R times K. We said capital K stands for capital. So this is the equation for the isocost line. And now we can derive the slope of the isocost line by rearranging the isocost line. Why don't we do that? Now we want to rearrange the isocost line and show that this equation here is exactly this line. So just remember, we've already done that, right? You might remember that the budget is, on the one hand, expenditures for good 1 plus expenditures for good 2 in the household theory. And what we did, we rearranged the budget constraint, and at the end of the day we had x2 is a function of x1, and then we had also the slope of the budget constraint. You might remember that. So this is absolutely analogous to that rearrangement. So what we do here is we want to rearrange the budget constraint for the company, so the cost constraint for the company, and we want to rearrange it in such a way so that we have an equation K which is a function of L. That's what we want to do, and this is a simple rearrangement, but I do it now step by step for some reasons. And we say, well, we want to get this here isolated, the capital K. What do we have to do? First, we have to subtract W times L. If we do that, so we have C minus W times L. Then we have W times L minus W times L, and and that yields obviously 0, so this disappears. And then we have on the right hand side of the equation still R times capital K, right? So we are pretty close to our target, so the next step is then, now let me wipe out this here because this disappears, right? Next step we have to do is just to divide by R. Why don't we do that? Dividing by R then yields here costs minus divided by R, wage divided by R times L equals R times K divided by R. And as you can see here, this disappears, R divided by R yields 1, so this disappears. And then we are done. So this is our rearranged budget constraint for the companies, or that's our rearranged cost constraint. So as we can see here, we start C over R, that's our starting point on the vertical axis. Why that? Well, if L is 0, if you are here, if L is 0, wage over R times 0, then this disappears and only the vertical axis here, C over R, remains. And we can also see if we derive this function with respect to L, then the slope here, the slope of the isocostline is minus wage over interest rate. And this is quite similar to that we have seen before with the budget constraint. So the isocostline and the budget constraint in household theory are quite similar. In household theory, we talk about households, and here in the production theory, we talk about companies, and these companies face scarcity, they face a constraint. In this case, it's the cost constraint, and then they want to, in the next step, optimize their production. So they have the isoquant, have the cost constraint, and then they will optimize production to maximize profits, or in other words, to minimize costs.